right. Welcome, everyone. Can you all hear me? Fantastic. Welcome. I'm Vivian Louie, the director of the Asian American Studies Program and Center here at Hunter College. So excited for today's event, the Asian American Writers Workshop at 30. So we are, of course, on the eve of Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month. And we're coming together on Zoom and in person to celebrate Asian Americans, arts, and activism. We're doing that by honoring the Asian American Writers Workshop, founded in 1991 on its 30th anniversary. We're going to feature readings from many of the writers who infused the workshop over the past few decades with such brilliant creative energy. We're also recognizing Asian American Studies at Hunter College, the largest undergraduate program in Asian American Studies in the City University of New York, or CUNY for short. And Asian American Studies at Hunter was founded at roughly the same time in 1993, and it will be celebrating its own 30th anniversary soon enough. So all these many years later, we're here together, right? Hunter's recently launched Asian American Studies Center, partnering, so proud to partner, with the Asian American Writers Workshop, with the Roosevelt House Public Policy Institute at Hunter College, where we're having this event for those who can join us in person. Thank you so much. So I always open with gratitude. So I want to express my many thanks to Hunter President Jennifer Rabb, Harold Holzer, the director of Roosevelt House, and his impeccable staff, Mac Barrett, Daniel Culkin, Peter Scaflani, and Aaron Lee Feynman. To Gabriel Galundas of Asian American Studies, who always supports our activities. To Lily Philpott of the Asian American Writers Workshop. To Christina Chu, Marie Lee, Mariana Budhoz, Ed Lin, and Curtis Chen. And to all the amazing writers, some of those, the names that I just mentioned are writers, so you'll hear from them, but them plus all the additional amazing writers that we're going to hear from today. You know, everyone played a critical role in bringing us together here today. And it was about 9 months ago, just about 9 months, that I met Curtis, who's the co-founder of the Asian American Writers Workshop, and we started talking about having this event today. And so much work has gone into this, and I really can hardly believe we're here in this space in the moment. So today's program is going to start with the amazing readings, and it'll conclude with a Q&A, including a discussion about literature, identity, and activism, but really about whatever you all want us to think about and reflect upon. And yet, as I stand here today, and as we're about to embark on this celebratory event, I have to share also some somber notes, right? June will mark the 40th anniversary of the death of Vincent Chan, who was beaten to death in a racially motivated hate crime in Detroit, Curtis's hometown. And in fact, he did an award-winning documentary about that. May marks the 140th anniversary of the passage of the Chinese Exclusion Act, the first federal legislation to bar labor migrants from a national origins background. But the Chinese Exclusion Act was not the last. There had been national, state, and local policies to exclude Americans descended from all parts of Asia. So this includes the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II, authorized by President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. But President Roosevelt also ended the exclusion of Chinese from the United States. This exclusion has included the targeting of Muslims and those racialized as Muslim, including South Asian Americans, in the wake of 9/11 and the 2017 travel ban. It includes the targeting of Sikh Americans and Hindu Americans. And all of this is not widely understood even today, even amongst Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. What is even less widely understood is how Asian Americans have pushed back, have launched key efforts to push back against these restrictions and so much more, primarily through our court system in the past 150 years, and through grassroots activism And the activism that we're seeing now, in response to the past 2 years and going, unfortunately, of anti-Asian hate, has a long history in our country. And that's why we have Asian American Studies. We need education that teaches us about the historical and civic contributions of Asian Americans, about our nation's own immigrant history of exclusion and inclusion. And this is because the experiences of Asian Americans are situated squarely in the story of our country, of the United States of America. Who counts as an American, and under what conditions? How can Americans build coalitions with one another to fight for equality for all? This kind of education is about all Americans, what being American means, and what we can do together to build a better nation for everyone. So at Hunter, we teach more than 1,000 students in 21 Asian American Studies courses over the academic year and in 5 summer courses. And so I'm really thrilled to highlight 2 of our wonderful faculty who've taught for us and continue. So I hope I don't embarrass them, but Mitch Wu, who's in the audience. And also, we're going to hear from Luis Francia. He's going to close out our readings today. He taught for Asian American Studies at Hunter for more than a decade, I think just about as long as Mitch, or yeah, around that. And we are so thrilled to have Luis back today, to have Mitch in our audience. You know, all our Asian American Studies courses, they help us pose, think through, and answer these key questions. Whether the courses are in the humanities and the arts, and we do have robust offerings in those areas, or in the social sciences, or in history, the law, or public policy. So today's program speaks to the powerful impact of the Immigration Act of 1965, which reopened large-scale immigration to the United States after about 40 years of a closed-door policy and 40 years of discriminatory quotas based on national origins. The Immigration Act of 1965 radically changed the trajectory of the Asian American community. It expanded the Asian American community in diversity, geographical boundaries, and in size. Today, Asian New Yorkers, for instance, are 18% of the city's population. The students in my immigration policy class that I teach, I know that some of them are in the Zoom room today, they could really give you a great module about the impact of the Immigration Act of 1965 on the United States. What this means is today the term AAPI describes a diverse and fast-growing population of 23 million Americans from about 50 ethnic groups with roots in more than 40 countries. The impact of this evolution, along with the influence of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, it was in fact civil rights activists and leaders who pushed for the Immigration Act of 1965. All of this has reached a pivotal turning point dating back to the early 1990s when the Asian American Writers Workshop was founded, and then 2 years later when Asian American Studies at Hunter was founded. Not only were the immigrants finally getting the chance to tell their own stories, but their children, many of whom came of age in that decade, were actively creating an Asian American identity, a literary movement, a social movement, right, that impacted the lives of Asian Americans from earlier migrations. And with that context as a backdrop, I turn it over to Ed Lin, who is today's moderator, and of course, one of our wonderful readers, to really bring to the stage today's pioneering writers who are going to share their stories today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. It's so wonderful that we are here gathered for the 30th anniversary of the Asian American Writers Workshop. And I guess this proves that Asians really aren't so great at math, because really it's the 31st this year. There you go. And to remember those days, I dressed exactly as I did in the 90s. Who am I kidding? I never changed. Okay. Enough about me. I want to tell you about Bino Realio. Intro. Curtis Chin and I met in 1990 in a gay Asian Pacific Islander Mena, New York Gapimni meeting. Outro. I finished 2 books recently. A collection of short stories with an all-Filipino cast of characters, which won a 2018 New York Foundation for the Arts grant, and a new collection of poetry titled hashtag The Rebel Sonnets, parts of which have appeared in the Georgia Review, the Harvard Review, and the Missouri Review, Zizapha, etc. Bino.
I didn't realize I was the first reader. So who decided on this order? Oh my God. Hello. 30 years, right? My God. 30 years ago, we didn't do this. Okay, so we're gonna have to do this. Huh? Oh, I didn't take your picture? Oh my God. I traveled with Luis today, and now I'm ignoring him, right? And okay, there's the husband up there. That Curtis is the hubbies. Wow. Yes. So thank you, Vivian. Where is Vivian? Thank you, Curtis and Lily. Lily, she's still upstairs. Coming here, I told Louise, that's Lily. I have never met Lily in my life. It's like, that's Lily. And then I saw a familiar head, and I said to Louise, that's Derek. That's Monique. It's so funny how you can recognize people who are masked, I think I was sort of recognizing people's souls or spirit or something like that. But thank you so much for organizing this event or for bringing us together. And the first 10 years of the workshop just went really, really fast for me. It just like, it was a speeding bullet train. I think I woke up from it when, and I told Christina Chudes when her book came out. And that's when I sort of like took a breath and realized it's been 10 years, and then we gave you that award from the workshop. We gave you that award from the workshop. And have not seen you since. And you look like, you're still 22. So you might want to talk about your secrets. Those of you who are here are actually the reasons, I think, that the workshop survived. And I really feel that your selfless dedication to the art, to the purpose of art, I think that serves sort of the fossil fuel of the workshop that made it last for 25 years after most of us joined it. So many, many congratulations to all of you for all your successes in your books and your inspiration. And thank you for being part of my personal journey, whether directly or not. I woke up very, very early this morning, actually, because the Philippines is 12 hours ahead of us. And I wanted to see Miss Universe Philippines to 2022. And it was streaming. And like the whole idea, and I was sort of reflecting while watching it. It's like, I'm watching something that's streaming. And I was trying to connect that to what happened 30 years ago when we were getting together and I was joining the workshop. I met Curtis in 1990, in fact, in that, the Gapimni meeting. And I was just coming back from Europe. And, I didn't study English or was not set out to be a writer. I studied foreign service. And I had no idea what Asian America was. I was totally clueless about it. I had no idea why all of these Asians were complaining about MFA programs. And I didn't know Curtis was a poet. and I didn't know what Asian America. I mean, it's for me because I was a sort of globalist. I was entering a world I was not familiar with, and I was also an immigrant. And the workshop basically catapulted me into that world of literature and introduced me to boundaries set around Asian America and beyond it. And I think to this day, and going back to Miss Universe Philippines 2022, the winner was half Filipina, half Italian, is that for many of us Filipinos, Asian America is still a concept. And a lot of us still don't recognize those boundaries. And to this day, geography continues to be the only thing that connects me to Asian America, which I still find very interesting. Let me bring you back to 1991 when we just started. We never had something fancy like this is too fancy. This is, those are nice chairs. We were reading in activist events and community organizations. Most people were standing in crowds, and we were invited to read, and we would tell them who we are. We called ourselves the Workshop. We never said Asian American Writers Workshop or AAWW. That's how you know they're not from New York, by the way. If they say, I'm with AAWW, you just do that. So it was around that time that when this India Pinay or India Filipino woman joined us. She was a member of Youth for Philippine Action, and she became our prime reader. And when we did readings, people went to the readings not because of the workshop, they went there because of her, actually. So we're sort of like riding her fame because everyone was just there in awe of this woman. And I'm not sure if any of you have actually saw her read, but every single time we had an event there, because of her, we're sort of planting the seeds for the workshop, and the workshop started becoming like the place to go for readings, and that's how it started then. But her name was Vina Cabrera Sud, and she's in the heart. Vina's presence helped put the workshop on the map in New York City in the first months of the workshop as kind of the place to go. But for me, it was a different thing. What she taught me was the relationship of performance to the written word. Then how important it was to stand here and make sure that no one is sleeping in the back. And for some reason, she was doing that so well, you know. And we would have readings like everybody's standing, you would be standing over there, but you certainly know the presence of Vina because there's silence in the room. And Vina, she's, short, right? She would start, it's very, very quiet in the room. She'd start reaching out, and you don't know what she's doing. It's like a ritual for her. Moving this, and thank you that I could actually physically do that. Lower it, demanding that action, that you watch her do it, that she's about to demand that you listen to her words. What you want from me, white boy? What you want from me, white boy? 400 years of fantasy island, paradise palms, multiple natives in primitive loincloths, gyrating, pulsating, brown, black, yellow bodies, festivaling to some samba, some sitar, some reggae, some Marley, 'cause Bob's hip, dude. And you, don't listen to his words. What you want from me, white boy? 400 years of plastic Buddhas and geishas to go, rainwater dancing, mazola eating, slow-eyed squaws, black pajamas smiling peasant peons, and jungle bunny drum-beating savages, all yours, all your hearts of darkness, all your wounded knee, my lie, Sharpeville, wet dream. What you want from me, white boy? 400 years of African artifacts and Ashanti bought from a white man on Fifth Avenue, teepees and Tutankhamun trapped behind alabaster prison of your museums, tribal powwows and Hari Hari Hare Krishna as your excuse to fuck, and torn posters on your wall of that fat elephant Indian god who did a lot of Gangnam Man just like you, and you don't know his name. What you want from me, white boy? 400 years of brown skin with no tan lines cause it's real. Split, ripped, cut, bruised, shot, raped. Dig it, man. High yellow Pocahontas, spread eagle pussy who sold the whips on her mama's back for your white shaft and a trip to Mother England, and boom boom girl, G.I. Joe sucking red-lipped, chink-eyed, fishnet stocking Sudways, gook cunt, pacified, colonized, domesticated, decimated, dead. What you want from me, white boy? I've always wanted you. Always watched you. Always waited just for you. In the little hole I've carved into my soul, with my knives, with my punji sticks, with my Molotov cocktails, with my bare hands, with my 400-year-old hatred. If this is on Zoom and Venus watching, thank you. Thank you to all of you.
Okay, one more time for Bino. Okay. Good people, I've led you astray. I'm supposed to read the intros before people read, and then the outro after they read. I will do this from now on. For now, I want to tell you about Christina Chu. Christina was interning at the Brooklyn Museum. She took writing workshops with Michael Cunningham and Jessica Hagedorn at the Westside Wise Writer's Voice, where she came across the poetry calendar with listings. One was a call to Asian American writers interested in starting an Asian American writing workshop. We met at a cafe. Curtis Chin, Bino Realio, and Lisa Simmons were present. Shortly after we started our workshop, I met Marie Lee, whose novel, Finding My Voice, was just getting published. I asked her to join. It was the best group of writers ever. Christina Chu.
So, thank you very much for reading, Bino. You always make us all look bad after you go. However, we'll try. We'll try. I just want to say it's really great to see everyone out here. The one thing about the workshop that was so great was we built our own community. And having had that experience before I went on to write and go to grad school or whatever, I actually understood what it meant to be in a workshop where people actually understood what you were doing. And it made such a huge difference because then when people told me, well, that makes no sense, you should rewrite X, Y, or Z, I would just say no. Which was, I would never have been able to do that if I had not had this community and not worked with this group of people here. And I think we were really, really lucky. It was such a wonderful moment in time, and I just feel so lucky that I'm a part of it. And I just want to say thank you for being here. So most of my work really deals with stereotypes, and I focus on the intersections of race and gender, usually. And the book that just came out in 2020, of course, 2020, is called Beauty. And it's about a woman who wants to go into fashion, and she's a creative, like most of us here. And she ends up having the perfect life. She meets and marries this guy named Jeff Jones, he's a designer, and you'd think that the trajectory of her own career would take off, but it's the opposite, right? She ends up at home dealing with a kid who's not so easy, and actually she's pretty miserable. She ends up moving out to the suburbs. She feels isolated, kind of like me, now that I think about it. But what I wanted to show was that in this particular scene that I'm going to read, this woman, she goes from being someone who is very conscious of what she wears, how she looks, to just not giving a damn at all. Okay? At this point in the book, she's married. She has a little 2-year-old, and her husband, his name is Jeff Jones. So I'm just going to read one little scene. I arrange for the sitter to arrive by 3 p.m., telling her when she arrives that I'll be home by 9 or 10. There's a new Star Wars Lego set in the closet. I give it to the sitter, then prepare dinner and run an early bath. Alex is in his PJs and building the fighter plane. I shower and get ready, even though I'm still not certain for what. Oh yes, her husband has been invited to a wedding, and he's the best man, but she's not invited. So she's at home, and she's supposed to be the babysitter. The first thing I try on is a white Theory dress. It makes me look fat. The second is a Helmut Lang jersey dress, but that makes me look frumpy. Finally, I step into what I originally planned to wear to the wedding, a form-fitting black Harvey Legger dress with white piping. But this, too, looks wrong. How could I have possibly considered this dress for the wedding? I walk the dog, give the sitter my cell phone number, along with my permission for Alex to watch TV, anything, if things get hairy. Then I drive straight to the Westchester Mall and valet the car at Neiman Marcus. Everything inside seems quieter the moment I step there. The marble floors, the clear glass counters displaying jewelry and makeup. I ride the escalator all the way up to the apparel section, being careful to avoid the Jeff Jones collection. Today, there's a sale. Even Helmut Lang has a rack. My hand is drawn to a tight-fitting black dress, compressed twill, sleeveless, with the sexiest yet most elegant back ever. In the fitting room, I try it on. The salesperson zips me up. It's like skin. In the fitting room, I see my old self coming back. I smoothed my hands down the front, turned to check the rear view mirror over my shoulder. I smoothed my hands over it again, then turned again to check the other side. The body, it's still there after all. Wow, the saleswoman says. How much, I ask. $268.80, down from $448. I love it. I hand her the credit card in my old dress. You'll wear it out, she says. Hell yeah, I say. When she's gone to the register, I take off my wedding ring and drop it into the change purse. Tonight, I'm not a wife or a mother. I'm me. I call the Japanese salon in town to ask if my hairdresser can squeeze me in, and he says he's had a cancellation, but only if I arrive within the hour. I'm there, I say. The sales clerk returns with my receipt and a scissor to cut away the tags. I stop next at the shoe department and immediately gravitate toward a Jimmy Choo sandal. It's made of snake-embossed leather with black contrast piping and a 4-inch metallic heel. The design and detail, the sheer craftsmanship makes these more, much, much more than just a pair of shoes. As Armani once said, to create something exceptional, your mindset must be relentlessly focused on the smallest detail. Here's proof of it. Something like awe fills my chest. This is the power of beauty. It's my size. I slip it on. And oh yes, I'm in love. In the full-length mirror, I see a transformation of myself back into the person I once was. How much for this, I ask. $9.25. Ouch. This is the last pair, the salesman says. How to justify? Well, I did save more than $200 on the dress. Besides, I don't have a pair of sandals like these, and I'm Jeff Jones' wife. I need to be presentable. I can't be looking like a mismatched FOB. I'll take them. I hand them the card. I go 70 miles per hour on the Bronx River Parkway and arrive at the hair salon within minutes to spare. My hairdresser, his name is a man named Morita. His clients refer to him as the Magnificent. He wears a long, neat ponytail down his back and sunglasses perched at the top of his head. He assesses my hair critically, the way a designer might examine the seams of a coat, and asks what I'd like. It's been almost a year and a half since my last trim. Long layers? It's vague considering the many kinds of layering techniques. Then I glance over at the dye job next to me with plastic wrap around her head. Highlights, I say. He sets to work, lightening my hair, then cutting while we talk about our kids. I tell him honestly about Alex, not only about how tough it's been, but how clueless my husband is about the situation. I don't know who I am anymore, I say, as he points and foils the size of my head. It's like the real me got lost. I try not to cry because it's not Japanese, to lose control. But my mind, it just snags against the prenup and the many other injustices. The assistant needs to give me a Kleenex. I feel mortified that I may have embarrassed Marita, and yet I confide that nothing I do, nothing I endure, will ever be enough to prove my love to Jeff. I'm done trying, I explain, and once I say it, once it's out there, it becomes obvious. I'm not in love with Jeff anymore. An hour and a half after he starts, Marita's angling a handheld mirror behind me so that I can see the back of my head as well as the front. My normally long, flat hair falls in what seems like waves. The highlights are subtle, but they brighten my entire face. I'm free. I smile and the person in the mirror radiates pure love back at me. "Oh, Kiran Asai," he says, nodding with reverence. "Welcome back." Thank you, everyone.
And this is Christina's outro. Because we read the outros after. Christina has published 2 works of fiction, a collection of stories called Troublemaker and Other Saints, and a novel, Beauty, which won the James Allen McPherson Award and was chosen as a Kirkus Best Book of 2020. Troublemaker and Other Saints won the Asian American Literary Award. Publishers Weekly wrote, Chu communicates the Asian American experience as adeptly and freshly as Sherman Alexie describes the Native American experience, or Junot Diaz defines Latino life in the U.S. Christina is currently working on her 2nd novel. Okay, our next reader, I think, is our first video presentation, Marie Myung-Ok Lee. Marie Myung-Ok Lee had to spend 6 years toiling on Wall Street to be able to live on her own in New York. Obviously, her investment banking colleagues had little appreciation or interest in literature. She just quit her job to write full-time. Spoiler, she had to go back to work, and would soon have a contract for her novel, Finding My Voice. But having not gotten an MFA or having any kind of cohort, she still felt lonely. That's when Christina, whom she knew in a non-writing way, invited her to her writing group that was all Asian Americans, and she eagerly said yes, and the rest was, as they say, history. She was on the early board and was the board president for 10 years. Okay, so we have video from Marie.
Hi, everyone. I got up so early this morning, all excited about being here. But then I realized I wasn't feeling great. And because I've been traveling since as recently as 1.5 days ago in spaces where I've been inside, even though masked, I just feel that being in proximity of people is probably something I shouldn't do, especially people I really want to give hugs to. So thank you to the geniuses who are allowing me to make a last minute video. And thank you to the current leadership and members of the AAWW, to new and old friends who are reading and attending. And of course, a big thanks to Professor Louie of the Asian American Studies Program and Center at Hunter College, and to the Roosevelt House Public Policy Institute at Hunter College. Thank you all for all your hard work in making this happen. So I'm just going to read from this lovely journal anthology that I not only found, but tucked inside it, I also found the original poster to this event, which was probably one of the first public readings that I've ever done. And so I'm going to read from my piece in it, which is called A Loss. It's because she wasn't raised around other Koreans. She heard her mother's voice, unmistakably apologetic, in the next aisle. Jerry peered furtively through an opening in a stack of canned tomatoes, but all she could see was the grocer's wrinkled face. She doesn't speak it at all? His eyes narrowed in disbelief and scorn, the cigarette at the corner of his mouth working like a metronome, recording the rhythms of his speech. There was a catch in her mother's voice, as if she might lie, but then she said, no. And a few seconds later, perhaps I haven't raised her right. I'll say so, the grocer said, slamming her produce onto the scale as if his intent was to bruise. What's he saying, Jer? Larry asked, peering over her shoulder into the hole, playing Stan Laurel to her hearty. She straightened up. He's saying we make a handsome couple. You're so full of it. Larry crossed his arms over his broad chest and grinned his killer grin at her. I'm going to start taking Korean lessons tomorrow. Suit yourself, she said. She remembered the first time her father's girlfriend called the house. Is Davy there? Where's Davy? said a shrill voice. Jerry had imagined blood red lacquered fingernails, cheap jewelry, a poodle named Precious. I think you have the wrong number. Even as a 9-year-old, God or some other watchful presence made her say the right thing. Yours, kid? I'm looking for your father, little girl, Davy Lee. If he's not home, let me talk to your mom. You have the wrong number, she said softly once more before she slammed the phone back into its cradle. At Jerry's apartment, her mother was preparing bulgogi. She mixed soy sauce, sesame oil, a little ginger, and chopped onion into a bowl for the marinade, in which she dropped the paper-thin slices of meat. When she visited New York, she didn't like to go out to fancy restaurants, as Jerry's father once did. She liked to stay in and cook. Larry was hovering about the kitchen and eating kimchi, his favorite way, straight from the jar, followed by beer chasers. Ugh, how can you do that? Jerry said. The mere idea of cabbage fermented with garlic and pepper disgusted her. I must be more Korean than you, Larry shrugged. Must be, Jerry's mother said approvingly from her place at the stove. Larry was a big, strapping boy. Nice, too. The kind that Yale should put on the cover of its catalog. He was even from Ohio. Jerry's mother seemed not to be able to control her delight the first time she met him. You don't mind that he's not Korean? Jerry had ventured. Her mother looked almost surprised at this. American boys are the best, she'd confided. Korean men are so... She dismissed all Korean men with a harsh exhalation of breath. She would even say this years later when her husband was recently deceased. Davy, where the hell's Davy? But that was only one man. Thank you so much. And I just want to close by showing Miss Galley of my forthcoming book, which I was hoping to show people in person. It's just wonderful that all of this is coming full circle, like right now, today, as they said in the movie, everything's happening all at once. Thank you.
And this is Marie's outro. Marie is so happy to celebrate this 3-decade anniversary for an organization that continues to promote and protect Asian American literature, now nurtured by a new generation, but with a similar sense of mission and purpose and enthusiasm. She was the first published author to join and has watched her fellow co-founders and members write and publish over the years, including Curtis, who just got his big book deal this year. And the founders are still writing together and still dear friends. She is loving the coincidence that her next novel, The Evening Hero, 18 years in the making, is coming out in a few weeks and is having her launch co-sponsored by AAWW. Thank you for all the work and memories, including that of Petey the Office Cat. Okay. Speaking of guys with really big book deals, I want to tell you about this next person. Our next reader and writer moved to New York City from Detroit in 1990, looking for other writers of color. From the moment he stepped off that Amtrak, he fell in love with the city. I give you Curtis Chin.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming. Yeah, it's so great to see so many familiar faces from 30-odd years ago. And we've all stayed friends, and I think that was the greatest thing about the workshop, is that I created these lifelong friendships with people. And you know, sometimes we stay in touch more often than not, but I know that it's also exciting to see how everybody's continued writing with their careers. And I'm sure that in this time period, we've all experienced a lot of you know, joys, but also heartaches and difficulties, because it's not easy being a writer. But the fact that we've all stuck it out, I think, is a testament to the type of home that the workshop created for us. Because while we may have encountered a lot of no's in all of our careers, you know, rejections and things like that, I feel like the one thing about the workshop was that it was always a yes. You know, anytime you walked into the space, it was yes. How can we do this? How can we make this happen? And I feel like I took that energy, you know, and continued on with my career. And yes, finally, I got the big yes this year, which is kind of exciting. It's a book called Everything I Learned in a Chinese Restaurant, and it's going to be coming out with Little Brown, and they just pushed up the pub date. So there's a little bit more pressure on that now. But I'm actually going to be reading a piece that is going to be appearing in Bon Appetit magazine in a month or two or something. I don't know when, but because I'm starting to get because I was doing film and TV and documentaries for a while, and so I'm now getting back into some more of this literary work. So I'm going to read this story. Okay, so the essay is called "The Gangsters and the Gays" by Curtis Gent. I grew up in Detroit's Chinatown. Yes, Detroit had a Chinatown. The neighborhood was small, only 2 grocery stores and 5 restaurants, 6 if you include the Indian Maharaj. But at age 12, it felt like the whole world to me. My family owned Chung's Cantonese cuisine, the most popular of the eateries, frequented by every type of city resident. Over the course of our 6-decade run, we sold over 10 million egg rolls. We might have even sold more if I hadn't eaten so many after school. A disproportionately large number of the Chinese residents were old, single men, which seemed odd to me until my parents explained how America's immigration policies had long prevented Chinese women from entering the country. Seeking kinship, these dozen of men from our ancestral homeland in southern China formed their own chosen family, a bachelor society centered on the Chinese Merchants Association, aka the Tong. Despite the stereotypes of Tongs as dangerous gangs, these guys seem more like cranky uncles to me. With their limited English skills, the men often ended up working in the food service industry as waiters and cooks. After the long work days, I would watch them slip through our kitchen and practically sprint down the flight of stairs to hang out in the gambling den underneath our restaurant. From the top of the landing, I could hear them swearing in Cantonese, the only Chinese words I understood, while casting their well-worn dominoes and chipped mahjong tiles. Occasionally, the gamblers would come up for a snack, typically our famous egg rolls, but if they were winning, they'd splurge on a swanky cup of our shrimp cocktail made with my dad's spicy homemade sauce. Surrounding Chinatown was the city's equally minuscule gay community, which also happened to be a bachelor society. Unlike in Chinatown, there were no laws preventing these men from being with women. They just preferred the company of men. Ones with sharp haircuts, muscular bodies, and Burt Reynolds mustaches. Their businesses were different too. Among them, a pet store, a dog grooming service, and an antique shop with a large collection of Life magazines. Except for the Gold Dollar, the drag bar 3 doors down from our restaurant, my parents had no problem letting me visit the gay-owned businesses. As a curious kid, I would sneak furtive glances at the young and fit shopkeepers, fascinated by their strange and exotic world. Though the fashion and music choices between the 2 groups were different, the Chinese and gay communities had something in common. In a blue-collar town focused on sports, beer, and bowling, both were considered outliers to the mainstream. After being accused of being dirty, sinful, and hellbound, they developed their own language and subculture. One of my most vivid memories from our family restaurant happened in middle school. It was the end of the day, and I was already mad at my dad. Despite Chung's posted closing time of 11, my desire to go home and crawl into bed. Dad, the consummate host, would never kick out any diners already seated in our dining room, no matter how long they'd lingered on that last bite or how many times I'd nodded off at my seat. On this night, we had welcomed a big round table of VIPs from Boston. My grandpa was the head of the Tong and always had to host any out-of-town guests. In their honor, our cooks made several traditional Chinese dishes, fancy mouth-watering plates not found on the menu of our chop suey joint, including crunchy, succulent gailan and salt-infused fishy ham yui. My Chinese sucks, sorry. At some point, a younger party of 4 dressed in tight t-shirts and jeans tapped at our window. Even at that age, my gaydar was already in operation. It was pinging like a busted car alarm. Before I could even make the case to my dad for turning them away so we could wrap up and go, he opened the door and welcomed with his signature hearty greeting, "Welcome to Chung's." At that rate, we were never going home. As the new arrivals perused our menu, they kept leaning over and staring at the strange foods spinning on the Lazy Susan at my grandpa's table. My dad had to explain that those dishes weren't on our menu, and besides, the men had to settle for something quick since we were technically closed. They accepted the restriction with grace, and in the kitchen, the cooks whipped up a savory plate of shrimp fried rice and chicken chop suey. As usual, they made a little extra for us kids to chomp on, along with a fresh plate for my grandpa and his friends, too. When my dad served the quartet, he surprised them by giving them free samples of the traditional Chinese food. To my surprise and delight, they scarfed it down and complimented my dad, and then, as they headed out, stopped by the table of old Chinese men and exchanged a few words about the strange and exotic dishes they'd just eaten. After the gay group exited, the old men nodded and smiled before finishing the last of their extra fried rice. At that age, I had recognized that a part of me belonged to each group of men. Seeing that the foods on both spreads were exactly the same, and how the two parties were able to connect, albeit briefly, gave me hope that someday we might all enjoy sitting together for one big happy meal, and I wouldn't have to choose between the two tables. Okay, that's my story. Thank you.
And this is his outro. Curtis is currently working on a memoir called Everything I Learned in a Chinese Restaurant. It's about growing up Asian in the black and white city of Detroit and coming out. It will be published by Little Brown in 2023. He also has an essay coming out in Bon Appetit magazine. Okay, we have our next video reader. It's Barbara Tran. Yes. She says, Curtis approached me at a Lee Young Lee reading, handed me a flyer, and invited me to join. All right, Barbara.
Blue from a distance. Phyloplume semiplume bristles, an empty calamus. Feathers receive no nourishment. They are dead structures. On a bird feather, each barb holds smaller barbs. On us, each loss encompasses smaller losses. Feathers soften the lines where different parts of the body meet. They sculpt the body into a teardrop shape. There is a phrase in Vietnamese, chia buông, that translates loosely into sharing sadness. In my family's case, it's like Jesus with his 2 fish and 5 loaves of bread. It's a boundless supply. Except, in our case, it's salt on salt sadness served with sorrow. The calamus lies beneath the skin. The rachis holds 2 veins. A layer of keratin allows space for light to play. Large tail feathers can act as a rudder. They can help with braking. There is no blue pigment in bird feathers. Blue feathers are a result of structure, reflection, wavelengths, bouncing. In Vietnamese, there is no specific word for blue. It shares the same name as green. To distinguish, you might say the sun of leaves or sun as the sky, which today is the furthest thing from blue.
And Barbara's outro is Madame Pirate, Becoming a Legend, a short film for which Barbara is a contributing writer, is a 2022 official selection of the Cannes Film Festival in the XR category. Okay. Our next video reader is Nancy Bull-Lacow. Here's her intro. Nancy Bull-Lacow was studying performance poetry at the New School for Social Research when a classmate decided to do his internship at Poets and Writers and offered her his spot at the AAWW. Nancy.
Hi, my name is Nancy Bull-Lacow, and I was with the Asian American Writers Workshop starting in 1994. I was an intern while I was studying performance poetry at the New School. I was with the workshop for many years, and I was the first readings director for the St. Mark's space. I have so many wonderful memories of that time, and I think back to them very fondly. And I'm really glad for this opportunity to share a poem from that time that I really loved doing and am excited to revisit with you. This is called In Any Medium It's Mud. Nothing to write, everything to write, nothing to write, everything to write, nothing to write, everything to write. There's nothing to write. There's everything to write. Fit in my pocket, if it could fit in my pocket, if I could make it fit in my pocket, I would clench my fist around the words. Words that come easy to me. Word that comes easy to me. Alabama. In my sleep, in my shower, as my feet meet the lines in a sidewalk. Alabama. Do I speak in my sleep? I can calculate the words in my head. Should, could, would, did. Remember. Remember words that cannot remember words, cannot remember words that I cannot remember words, I cannot remember words that I cannot remember the words that formed your sentences. So my drink has grown cold and I am left sending my messages coded. SSOS, 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 SSOS. Cannot make the words, but I can find them. Languishing diamond white under fingernails. Girlness, goddess, girl, goddess, shine blankly. Last night I found I'd already prepared your bed. Your loved ones came and hung elaborate decorations from the ceiling. From where I would sit with you, I could see grass and hills. But I left before you came last night. I'd forgotten what good feels like. It was hard, but I did it. I have forgotten what good feels like. I used to know answers. I used to know answers to questions. I used to know why. I used to know every way of why. We, she, me, I lost our days after May. Phase 2. I catch you smile as you tilt your head. Daddy breakfast, daddy lunch, daddy dinner. I have found my home, daddy breakfast. I am in my home, daddy lunch. In my home, daddy dinner. I cast the plastic from my heart, only to find paper. Ruled, unruled, handmade, machine-made, colored, discolored, blank. Words, 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 words coming easy to me. Matchstick, toothpick, boy. Shadow of a sun. Shadow of a night. Straining to remember your voice. Spiraling down a curl like a smoke ring. Brush, rush away emptiness. Wild, wide brushstrokes. I blacken my mistakes. Plank by plank. I am not sorry. Ringing through. Sad but true. Special is relative. So pick by piece, by box, by block. I am whole again. Like a blade, I bleed. Thank you. Happy anniversary.
And this is Nancy's outro. Nancy is now a consultant to museums, theaters, art, and culture spaces. Okay, conflict of interest. I'm the next reader. Okay, I'll read my own intro. Okay, Edlin, he first came to the workshop after seeing an Asian American Writers Workshop open mic at the Chinatown History Project in 1992. Two of the readers were white women in cheapows. I have this uncle who's a complete useless idiot. This guy is late for everything because he almost always gets in a traffic accident. He almost always gets in the traffic accidents because he won't use turn signals. And he won't use turn signals because a shop once charged $100 to replace the bulb when it burned out. He had tried to replace it himself and got an electric shock that blasted him 5 feet down the driveway. There's an apocryphal family story about my aunt rolling his unconscious body aside and driving the car to a shop. Anyway, that was years ago, and my uncle hasn't signaled since. So naturally, when I was taking a commuter train into Jersey on Saturday, I really didn't want Uncle Shi to pick me up at the station to take me to that stupid wedding. When I found out that that was the plan, I was livid. I was on the phone with my mother. I was going to get an Uber, Mom, I said. My parents were close with the groom side of the family and too entangled with the ceremony to get me. He's your father's brother. It will be an insult if you don't ride with him. I would get to the wedding faster and safer if I took an Uber. Uncle She held you as a baby. Well, I hope you took a picture of that so you can use it at our funeral when we both die in a car accident. Don't joke about death. It's bad luck. Uncle She is already at the station waiting for you. It was impossible to miss his scraped up Jetta with no hubcaps. But the front passenger seat was empty. Hi, Uncle, I said as I sat up front with him. We shared a pathetic handshake. You wore your suit, he said. Uncle She was wearing a t-shirt and sweatpants as if he'd been sleeping in the driver's seat. I had several questions, but I decided to ask one. Is Auntie coming with us? We pick her up at home, he said. We pulled out, and soon we were on the I-95. We rode in silence for a while until I spoke up. Wasn't that the exit to your house? My uncle remained silent. Did we pass your exit? Still nothing. When an elder is silent, it's best not to ask too many questions. It's like shaking a can of Coke. Just know that there's something wrong. You probably don't need to know about it. We went 2 more exits before he turned off. He drove us to an industrial-looking area and pulled up in front of a self-storage facility. You need to get something out of storage now? I asked. He didn't say a word. He parked, got out, and left. I looked at the feeds on my phone, and luckily my uncle soon returned with a duffel bag and a plastic bag clanking with dirty plastic dishes. He put his stuff on the floor in the back seat before getting behind the wheel again. Is your suit in there? I asked him. No answer. We got back on the I-95 and took the correct exit to his house. His phone rang a few times, but he didn't pick up. When we got to his house, Auntie was at the top of the driveway, making a big show of putting her phone back into her handbag. We both got out of the car. She came up and gave me a hug. Wow, got so big! She completely ignored Uncle She as he picked up his stuff and went into the house. That's a nice dress, I told her. Thank you, got 30% off. Great. Where's your girlfriend? I don't have one. This should be your wedding. But it's not. He's younger than you. A few years, his company went public. I saw on CNBC. He has millions of dollars. Only on paper. She dropped her voice. You should give your parents a baby. I wrote a book that's like having a baby. Oh, said my aunt, suddenly remembering it. It's such a good book. She petted my right arm. Then her fingers tightened. Go in the car. She took the front passenger seat and I got in the back. Uncle sleeps in the storage unit. Why? Because he's stupid. How long has he been sleeping there? A year. A year? I had his suit dry cleaned this week. I saved him. We waited in silence for a while. What happened, Auntie? She shrugged. If I asked her again, she might start crying. My uncle returned with his suit on. He put a laundry bag of clean clothes and a storage box filled with containers of food my aunt had made in the seat next to me. Then he got behind the wheel and started the car. As he drove on, I listened to the tires moaning beneath us. I looked out the window and saw the trees of Jersey whip through the reflections of my aunt and uncle. We finally neared the wedding and reception complex. And because Uncle Shi didn't signal, an SUV swerved around us and leaned on the horn, bringing me out of my reverie. I had to collect myself, but my aunt and uncle were deaf to the sound. We rolled into a space near the back because we were late. Before Uncle Shi could kill the engine, my aunt popped out and walked quickly to the entrance. Uncle Shi tried in vain to catch up with her. As she neared the sliding door, she stopped. My aunt didn't turn around, but she was clearly waiting for him. He closed the distance, and as he drew next to her, they walked in together. A long night of fakery was ahead for them, for everyone at the wedding. I hung back a little. I hadn't wanted to come to this wedding. I hadn't wanted to see these people. I hadn't wanted to dress like this, but I was already here. It was too late to leave. Honestly, I was glad I didn't have to pay for an Uber. I had impulsively quit my semi-decent job when my book came out, and I hadn't told anyone, certainly not my parents. And the book wasn't doing well. I went inside, ready now to do my own faking. A family friend came up to me and pointed at my heart. "Next time it's your turn." Thanks. Oh, and this is my outro. I am working on a crime book and a potential YA book. I want to tell you about Monique Trung. I came to the workshop in 1991, which was the year after I'd graduated from college. Can't remember how I first heard about it, though. Monique.
Hi. Wow, that is like my fantasy, is to be part of the Ed Lin television show, and I kind of feel like this is what this is, and so this is so fabulous. I don't remember, because I think I don't remember most of the 90s, but the workshop, the workshop is really, to me, a home and a community, and in a sense, a country. And I say the word country, especially on today, April 30th, because for for Vietnamese Americans and members of the Vietnamese diaspora, many, this is the day that we call the Fall of Saigon. And this is when what we knew as South Vietnam disappeared. And there are many ways that I think refugees can respond to that kind of erasure. And one way, I think the way that I have and my fellow Vietnamese American writers and artists have, is that we define country differently. So I'm going to read a very short section from my most recent novel. It's called The Sweetest Fruits, and you'll see that idea reflected in this passage. Almost 14 years we had together, Yakumo. Less than 1 in Matsue, 3 in Kumamoto City, less than 2 in Kobe, and 8 here in Tokyo. A garden pavilion, and then a house in the shadows of Matsue Castle. 2 houses in Kumamoto, 3 in Kobe, and 2 in Tokyo. The only one that you owned is this one, and you left it just 2.5 years after entering its garden gate. Tallied, these numbers suggest a brief, nomadic life, sheltering under rented eaves, lacking in land, weak in roots. numbers are poor storytellers. Every city and every house was a home, Yakumo, because we were each other's country. You thought it was called Japan, but that was the country outside. The country inside was founded by two unlikely travelers. In Kumamoto City, that country added to its populace, sending for foster grandfather, foster father, and foster mother. Then Katsuo arrived to become its first native born. The other three children claimed their citizenship in Tokyo. When you departed, I was left an exile in the country outside. I miss what was once under the eaves of this house, Yakumo. At first, the garden pavilion was the foreign land, as far from Matsue as I had ever been. I, as novice travelers tend to do, located and clung to what was familiar there. On the morning of the introduction, I was consoled by a bush warbler in a large hinoki cage, a gift from the daughter of the prefectural governor. The bush warbler was singing a mating song because the little fellow had been duped by the warmth of the pavilion into believing that spring was already here. I knew what I would do first if I were to stay. I would slide open a soji window, the one nearest to the little fellow's cage, and allow in a thread of cold so that he would know that winter was still in Matsue. Thank you.
Okay, her outro. I'm writing a libretto for the composer Randall Ang, based on his father's youth in Norfolk, Virginia, circa late 1940s. Okay, Vina and Manny Orden. Let me tell you about them. Okay, Vina Orden and her father Manny Orden discovered the AAWW on St. Mark Street not long after they immigrated to the US in 1992. Manny will read poems from a middle grade novel in verse he began in a class with Ed Lin in 1995 and recently completed in retirement. Vina has come full circle at AAWW, her first home as a reader and now as an Open City Community Reporting Fellow, where she currently is working on a portfolio of underreported stories about the pandemic and its aftermath, particularly of low-income Asian Americans in in-between spaces. Vina and Manny.
Hi, first of all, I just want to say thank you to Curtis and Christina and Nancy. I'm clearly the party crasher here. I definitely, consider the workshop as, again, my home as a reader, because they used to have a bookstore. And that was really the first place where I could go to a bookshelf and see a book by a Filipino-American, and that was Jessica Hagedorn, who of course was very involved in this space in the 90s. And so, I've just been listening to everyone today, and there were just so many things that resonated, and one of them is this idea of Asian American. I think when we first came to this country, again, as an immigrant, you don't really know what that is. You don't even know what Filipino American is. And as a writer, I just have to say this space is still so important today. I think it was Curtis who said earlier that it is the space of yes. And so I think for a lot of us who are still emerging and finding our place, our voices. I am actually reading from the first essay that the workshop published, so it was a place of yes for me that's opened up other doors. And also, again, coming full circle, I just wanted to shout out to my fellow Open City fellow, Grace. I see you, Grace Jang Lee. So yes, the AAWW is still a very, very special place for Asian American writers. So I'm going to read from an essay called The Little Brown Brother's Burden. My paternal grandfather, Lolo Pilong, was the first in my family to migrate to the US. In the late 1920s, when the Philippines was still considered American territory and Filipinos US nationals, Lolo was granted an opportunity to attend St. Ignatius College, now the University of San Francisco. The family's only photograph of his time in California was from a page in his 1929 yearbook. In the photo, Lolo stands erect in a double-breasted suit with his hair carefully parted and combed back, gazing assuredly at the camera. What isn't captured is the desperation of a young man who had to pick citrus fruits and cut sugarcane in 100-degree heat on farms in Stockton, Merced, Visalia, and across the San Joaquin Valley, because those were the only jobs available to little brown brothers like him. Dad recalled that Lolo ripened mangoes by wrapping them in newspapers, the way he learned to wrap himself for warmth, nightly in the fields where he labored. Lolo returned permanently to the Philippines in 1938 with nothing but a suit and a few bottles of shampoo, so the story goes. He spoke little of his ordeals in the US, but the one thing he impressed upon his sons was to remain where they were and not chase after the American dream. My family eventually immigrated to the US long after Lolo had passed, yet his specter still haunts us. Over a bowl of soup at our favorite noodle shop in Chinatown, Dad opened up to me about what it was really like for him in those early years in New York. He confessed that he had joined our church choir not for pious reasons, but to learn how to speak English with an American accent so that he could be understood. He attempted to dye his hair from natural black to a lighter brown, gain an inch or two by wearing thick-soled shoes, and even contemplated bleaching his skin or getting a nose lift. When I was made to feel different and treated differently from others, I began to understand my father's objection to emigration, Dad said to me. After all this time, we're finally working on breaking the silences and forgetting in our family. We've come to realize that in curating our family story, we've lost stories of survival and resistance. And now, more than ever, what we need in these challenging times are our ancestral guides who survived wars, economic depressions, and deaths by nature or by man. Recollecting their missing narratives of struggle helps illuminate this moment in history for our community. And with that, I want to invite my dad up on the stage to read some of those poems that he started working on in Ed's class.
Thank you, everyone. Ed, thanks for teaching me for how many years, and that year I went to the workshop was also was also my appointment as a social worker in the Bronx, and started working with what was labeled as the children at risk, and ... And so when I went to the field, at risk of everything, that's what I found. And so along with my work with Ed and my social work, I began to hear history of the initial migration of slaves and into America, and along with these things, I began to see that what we were looking at that year was a symptom of these developments, hidden, undefined, and untold. So they came together, and I, this work I titled it New Yoid, YOYD, to develop the characters that I saw in this little history. And so the sapioids, called sappies, they waddle, need not go anywhere, can last, being last. The phrenes, phrenicoids, phrenes, need to be somewhere instantly, can never be last. And the fabricoids, the fabbies, whirl, can be nowhere, can't be nowhere, need not wait, and can't be last. So these are the little boxes where I put people in my job and my approach to the communities. For example, the early settlements in the Bronx wiped out the tribes of the Renanskua Indians, the part of the Lenape group. And so these are the untold, unrecognized people that we were working with, and it was the unconscious dynamics going on. And when I got into my field work, that highways, the highway, and it dawned on me that the highway was the highway of what people called the lost Moses. There were two Moses. There wasn't one who led the people from executions from their land, and there was another Moses that just buried all the lands of the Indians. And I did a little research on what this was all about, and there were a few pictures about reparations for the Indians who lost their lands. But the question of most people is, we have never seen villages and burial sites dug up and reburied in a most respectful way. So that's the background of the sapioids. The sappies waddle, need not go anywhere, can last, being last. The phrenes need to be somewhere instantly, can never be last. The fabbies, whirl, can't be nowhere, need not wait, and can't be last. Sappies, the small ones, too small to matter, none is big enough to quibble about. So they're just buried left and right, and then there's housing, cold housing, but the housing in the next 10 years is gone. So the sappy is too small to matter, none is big enough to quibble about. The phrenes drive far from each other. With someone away can't squabble. Fabby is too big to quarrel, will be gone after a brief wrangle. In balancing their planet, the small planet of the Bronx, Sappy's spleenless must have veggies. Franny's twist must have fish. Fabby's upbeat must have meat. And so the layers of classes are equivalent or related to the diets of the occupants of the people I have been working with. Sappy's scrub trails and fields. Franny's churn and filter streams. Fabby's blow dirt off skies and mountains. The Sappy's with nary a ruffle scatter and tend seeds. Franny's race to freezing waters, stir tepid spaces. Fabby's roam, munch and crunch with roaring dashes. Then the question is, each of them as a group name things and events that happened about them and in them. They rejoiced and celebrated when there were things that they had experienced, and there were dreams that haunted certain populations. And so they developed a language, a vocabulary. And so here, and so here, the people complain. They organized to advocate, and there are left behind unheard the older populations, the people of wisdom, and the younger people are restive. They don't see enough changes in their socioeconomic status. They don't see enough equity in the communities. But the elder ones, they say, let's just keep talking. Talk is therapy. If you are helpless, but you have somebody to talk to and express your grief, it helps. So the ultimate wisdom of the elders there are put in the language of the Sapioids. The last two lines are, words are water, fire, and wind. A sentence, key, fin, and wing. So I keep repeating this in so many ways, and even my few acquaintances that I had developed, this has become for me a way of healing, talking. And we don't need arms, anger, or fights. Talk has a way of cleansing and healing. And hopefully the next generation will find words, will articulate sentences that will be key and fins and wings for themselves. Thank you.
Okay, there's no outro, so I'll just say that if you ever took a class with me and feel like you got something out of it, it was always inside you. All I did was turn on the light. Our next reader says, I may be an unreliable narrator on this recollection, And I believe I encountered AAWW members tabling during an APA month celebration in Union Square in the mid-90s. I give you Purvi Shah.
So good to be here. How are y'all doing? You need coffee. How are y'all doing? Oh, okay, all right. I feel like I'm going to go on a little time travel journey, and what is amazing is we are the time travel. I feel like 30 years ago, this felt unimaginable in a way, and so we are a magic of time. I had the great privilege of being one of the editors, along with Monique and Marina and Eileen and so many other folks, of the Asian Pacific American Journal. From 1997 to 2005, I was one of the editors. And I found this poem in the Open Jar, which was before I got to the workshop. And I'm going to share this poem by Andrew Tang, which won the first place in the Poetry Prize in maybe 1993. And it is called Where Men Go to Cry. And I was stunned because it's a prose poem. And like, as a young one, I was like, what? Poetry can look like this? That's amazing, mind-blowing. But this poem is also mind-blowing. Where Men Go to Cry. Under all the heaven stands a man in pajamas. The man is thinking of his daughter and how she might be with another man, and how their two bodies would fit together like some strained configuration of love. She is hundreds of miles away in the District of Columbia, and he cannot sleep. The father wants to know, has to believe that his daughter is all right and all alone, so he drives from his house in Stony Brook and makes his great march southward, burning everything in his imagination: the bridges of New York, the Jersey turnpikes, the puniness of Delaware and Maryland. The road turns in his eyes as if his small car rides on a tiny globe and fits in like a gear or a ball bearing, so the landscape will never change. He doesn't even look at the monuments, the cold cherry trees, the fragile Potomac. He just drives. When he reaches her apartment, he doesn't slow down but continues on to Virginia until he stops beside a briar patch. He walks barefoot, still in his flannels, to feel the itch and prickle of longing, stands amazed at the vastness over him, wondering whether anything he'd say to his curious wife could explain why he did what he did, and whether he can name that burning of distances by which love makes us leave our senses or let go in going. Andrew Tang. I feel like I was more like the daughter in that. So the workshop gave me inspiration, and I want to just give you a sense of, what our submissions policies were like in this time period. So you could send us a disc submission. Please send with a printed version of your work. State in the cover letter what program you used. We prefer Microsoft Word 8.0 for Macintosh, but can accommodate other Macintosh and IBM programs. We were so accommodating. So these were two of the journals I got to work on, and they were activist journals. We talked about the Taxi Workers Alliance in the back of this issue. I wish this issue weren't as relevant to me today as it is. It is an issue called The Body, and the cover are breast cancer cells. And this next poem, last poem I'm going to read, is in honor of Ananta Sudhakar, who many of you know, and worked at the workshop with Jeannie and other folks. Anantha survived cancer, breast cancer, and then it metastasized 6 years ago. She transitioned to another form on August 11th of last year. So, Anantha, thank you for all your legacies and lineages, all the events you helped organize at the workshop, all the ways in which you loved writers and language, and this space is for you. With you, we encounter endless joys for Anantha and her beloveds. And this is from Anantha. If cancer has taught me anything, it is this core contradiction. It is possible to have a good life, a truly happy, good life, and a hard one all the same time. With you, we can encounter endless joys. At stage 4, 4 years in, you go to the horses. You ride Smokey and let your body be your body. Let yourself be with your body. The storms in New York City yesterday reminded me of monsoons. I read to you from Kalidasa, the endless longing of rains, of lovers separated. What weather solaces when a sister separates? What climate evaporates grief? July, I sent you Lantana's Lucky Flame. The card came without my name. The most important things in life are unknown. The most devastating griefs come from the loves you have known. Yesterday, a hornet scurried up a tree, a cicada in its grip. This urge to feast, to share victories with the nest. Some people come and teach you how ample the nest, how vast our community of song. Thank you for widening my table of grief. And perhaps you already know, in a place that resembles bliss, there will be horses. And perhaps you already know, in this life, there will be joyrides, cookies and fancy wines, sisters singing in the rain, a smoke we will watch you ride all the way to freedom.
Purvi's working on having better timing in getting a third poetry manuscript into the world while giving more love to her second collection, Miracle Marks, which came out slightly before the pandemic. Okay, our next video reader is Eileen Tabios. I came to the workshop by learning about it through the APA journal that I stumbled across at a Barnes & Noble on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. Eileen.
Hello, everyone. I'm Eileen Tabias, and it's a pleasure to say congratulations to the Asian American Writers Workshop on its 30th year anniversary. I'm delighted to have been part of its history, and I'd like to share one poem which I had crafted by plucking lines out from the movie The Professor and the Madman, which is a history of the Oxford English Dictionary. Since the Writers' Workshop is about writers, I thought to share a poem based on words. And it's titled, If Love, Then Love. All I need are books. Every word in action becomes beautiful in the light of its own meaning. When I read, no one is after me. When I read, I am the one who is chasing after God. What I know of love, the sickness often becomes the cure. The brain is wider than the sky. I can because of you. Madness gave us words. Sometimes when we push away, that's when we need to be resisted. I wanted to document the history of each and everything, to offer the world a book that gives a meaning of everything in God's creation. The book. It's not ours to quit. I know the answer to the widow's question. I celebrate you, AAW, and I celebrate words. Thank you.
Okay, this is Eileen's outro. Working on the second and third novels that will form a trilogy that began with first novel, Dove Lion, released in 2021. No Twitter. Will release later this year her second French translated book, Double Take, and a new poetry collection, Because I Love You, I Become War. Okay, our next video reader is Tina Chang. At the beginning of my writer's life, I received a fascinating newsletter about a group who were starting a workshop for Asian American writers. I felt like I was holding a magical document, but it was filled with typos. And I contacted the number listed on the newsletter. Someone named Curtis Chin answered the phone and said, "If you think there were so many errors, why don't you consider working with us to make sure that doesn't happen?" I took Curtis up on his offer, and my life was forever changed. Tina.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tina Chang, and I would love to wish the Asian American Writers Workshop a very happy 30th anniversary. In so many ways, I can't and can believe that it's been that long. I can't believe it because I don't want to believe that so much time has passed, but I'm grateful for those years because it brought me in contact with so many important individuals. First and foremost, I would love to thank Curtis Chin for his inspiration personally in my life. I would not be a writer if I hadn't met him and walked through the doors and felt his impact. And similarly, I would really love to thank Marie, Christina, Bino as well for your vision that started this incredible workshop that has impacted many generations since its founding. And thank you to my friends and people who I collaborated with and people who I remember so fondly from those first few years at the workshop. People like Nancy Bulalakaw and Barbara Tran, Christian Langworthy, Luis Francia, Eileen Tabios, Reggie Kubico, all the members of Peeling the Banana, Purvi Shah. I hope I didn't forget Barbara Tran, but there are just so many individuals who I remember dearly and that are still practicing and writing and making exciting things. So I'm happy that we get to exist in the same world together. It feels like a dream. I'm grateful. I'd like to read to you just a part of something that recently was published in The Margins, which is a publication of the AAWW. It's part of a much longer portfolio called Zuhitsu, a notebook. Zuhitsu is a Japanese form, actually a female Japanese form that really translates into following the brush. It can have the impact of something that feels random or very collage-like, but in the creating of it, it's anything but random. This particular Zuhitsu, called Motivated, contemplates who gets to say what is racially motivated or what is a racially motivated crime, who are those authority figures, and most importantly, it contemplates the life being lived as an Asian American woman. It contemplates hate crimes, sexual transgressions, and daily awkwardness and racism in the workplace, on the streets, basically contemplating this kind of dull sense of danger that an Asian American woman walks through the world with. But this is the short poem that ends that much, much longer piece, which I think is about 12 pages. And this is called Motivated. If I take off my mask, I breathe a solace so deep I destroy the trees. I set fire to the woods. I walk alone amidst the smolder, but free. Sometimes in my dreams, I come back to life. My lungs fill with the knowledge of a century, which is a kind of funeral, fatal song as it's ending. All year long, I waited for the final breath that never came. We kept ourselves busy. We played games, took turns, made bread, then broke the loaf in half to see nothing inside but air. And we were thankful for the world within us that pulled us back with a dazzling grief. A prayer inside me that was a wish to end my mourning by never dying. I struggle to live. I carry time like earrings, falling in chandeliers around me. I struggle to hear myself knocking on the other side of the door. And the year in its infancy crawls to ask me to hold it without crushing it, to cradle its face, which marks me with a trace resemblance. My skin feels it and asks, how much of this earth can hold you long enough before you ignite? How much paradise can you bear? Thank you so much. Happy anniversary.
All right, and Tina adds, what I'm making now. I'm working on a long poem focused on the experiences of Asian American females as they engage with forms of racism at the workplace, in public places, and as they make their way through a world that cannot guarantee their safety. I look forward to staging this as a hybrid work one day. Okay, Marina Budos, how I came to the workshop. I believe it was because I attended an A magazine party with a friend, and I met a lot of people and learned about the workshop. And before I knew it, whoosh, there I was, often at the space on St. Mark's, especially as my first novel came out in 1995 and I joined the caravan. A lot of my early dating life with my future husband, Mark, was spent at the workshop. He was an editor and published some of the workshop folks. What I plan to read, an excerpt from my YA novel, We Are All We Have, which will be published by Random House in October. The main character, Rania, is supposed to go to Hunter. Marina.
It is so great to be here. And I have to say that the workshop was so much a part of my beginning as a writer, my learning how to read as a writer. So, and this is the first public reading I'm doing post-COVID. So it seems like full circle in so many ways. I was so glad that Purvi mentioned the journal. I had the opportunity to co-edit one of the journals, The Body Issue, with the late Mina Alexander. So I feel her spirit here, especially since she taught at Hunter. So again, it does feel as if there's some kind of full circle going on here. The workshop was so much a part of my life in the 90s. And I did want to mention, there is this display when you first walk in, and that just gives you a sense of how much publishing was going on, the fact that it was a bookstore. And when we went out on the caravan, which, we went to all these college campuses, and I don't know if Curtis remembers this, but we used to argue about stopping at Burger King and McDonald's because I never eat at those places, and he always wanted to stop there, so we were always having these arguments about it. That's what I most remember. But I sort of felt like we were spreading the gospel of the Asian American Writers Workshop by doing these college tours, and that was just so much fun. Anyway, I am going to read from my novel, which is coming out. I have even a cover. This is the cover. It's called We Are All We Have. I'm going to be reading from chapter 2. The first chapter is kind of dramatic. Rania is this Pakistani girl who lives with her single mother, younger brother in Brooklyn. But this is just a chapter, kind of, I don't know, chapter 2. That's all you need to know. 2 months ago, I was running around for fun. It was early April, one of those hot, humid days where sweat pricks the back of your neck the minute you step outside. I just dropped off Kamal at school and was heading over to the subway to meet my best friend, Fatima. This was our routine ever since we met at the beginning of ninth grade in gym class. On that day, I was groaning and cursing, my thick hair falling in my face when a girl handed me a gold-braided tie saying, "Take it, I've got made 50 more." She had the same wild waves as me, but she looked way more chic with her gray-green eyes, her drab uniform shorts rolled into neat cuffs. I snapped the band into place and felt sleek and cool. Now, by spring of senior year, it's like there's a wind under our sneakers. Fatima and I glide and slide through the Brooklyn streets, my neighborhood, Sunset Park, hers in Bay Ridge. Our shoulders loosened back, not bowed with textbooks. All that counted is behind us. Sure, we've got our Regents exams, but I'm not too worried. We're in the 4th quarter, our grades stacking up fine. I've got my admission to Hunter College. After lots of family drama, Fatima's going to Brooklyn College. On that day, we were wearing matching Freedom t-shirts that Fatima designed, showing a silhouette of 2 girls before a sunset. A little reward to ourselves for 4 years of manic work and pushing for grades while taking care of our siblings and remembering to pull the meat out of the freezer for dinner. So what if we declared ourselves free a little early? We deserve it. Self-care, Fatima calls it. She's always posting pics on Insta on how to give yourself a spa day or light scented candles to soothe your spirit. Blissful pictures of windows looking out on the Mediterranean Sea or of us lounging in Sunset Park, showing off our petties. Fatima's something fierce about fashion and self-love. I'm sure it's because of her mother, who got married at 16. Mrs. El-Awadi is always in the same long house dress, day in, day out, too busy with taking care of Fatima and her 3 brothers. Fatima gets furious at her mother for letting her roots grow out. Now and then she drags her into the bathroom, packs her hair with her grandmother's recipe of henna and yogurt. I think Mrs. El-Awadi kind of likes it. My daughter, the bossy general, I always obey. That's the biggest thing we have in common, our moms. Young old, we say, we'll never be like them. We'll fly fast before life tugs us by the ankles. Isn't that the whole reason they came to America? Fatima's mother thought she was going to go to university in Cairo to be a nurse until her parents told her about a great match, a young man who already owned a business in the U.S. After many cups of mint tea talking about the 2 young people, the matter was settled between the families. "No way, that's how my life's decided," Fatima often declares. Now, on this warm spring morning, I found Fatima waiting by the subway entrance. She had on a denim jacket to hide how tight her t-shirt pulled across her chest. I'm sure her mom wasn't too thrilled about that. "I got the afternoon off," she told me. "Me too. Kamal's going to a friend's place. Want to go downtown after school?" "Oh, yeah." Freedom. We laughed, bumped fists. Our Freedom t-shirts came from when we were studying the beats with Mr. D, junior year, and reading Jack Kerouac's On the Road. I complained that the main characters are just a bunch of sexist white dudes who get to do whatever they want, and all the women are called girls and get dumped. "Go ahead, rewrite it," he told us. So I did. We performed our feminist version for Mr. D's Beat Cafe Night. Brooklyn Rah-Rah and Fa-Fa, we called ourselves. We sat on folding chairs in black felt berets on our own wild road trip to find America. At the end, I got up and gave my last riff. The road is a licorice whip sliding down my throat, red bean buns in Sunset Park, watching the sky blush pink. West, go west, the beats told us. What if the road isn't yours because the guys got there first? Maybe the road is your head bristling with possibilities, the America of me, not the Mexican girl left behind in California, the jazz players of Denver. We want America too, but our mothers say, "Be careful, watch out, curb your mouth, bring in the laundry? How do you find America when you've got dinner to make, when you can't kiss that boy under a red hook moon? I am not my mother, I am me. How do I find the America that is me? We got a lot of cheers, some howling, kids punching the air. Mr. D submitted that and some of my other writing to a contest. I won a scholarship for Literary Promise, which helped pay for Hunter College. Meanwhile, Fatima fought with her parents to go to FIT, but her father put his foot down and said she was going to Brooklyn College since it's closer to home and she'll major in something more practical. Still, we made promises to meet up in Prospect Park or rove around the city as much as we could. Our version of free. Thank you.
And Marina adds, what I'm working on now, Liberty Park, an adult novel about an Indo-Guyanese widower and his estranged son, a Hollywood actor, as the two struggle to connect and reconnect in the shadows of immigration, fame, death, and divorce. Our next and last reader says, I was invited to join the board while it was still headquartered at St. Mark's, and Peter Ong was the director, not far at all from the Village Voice, where I was working as an assistant editor. Soon after, Quang Bao took over as director. Luis Francia.
Hi, and thank you to the workshop, Curtis and Vivian, for organizing this. This is a kind of homecoming because I used to teach at Hunter for about, I think, 11 years, which I thoroughly enjoyed. I just wish they paid more. No reflection on the director of the program. So I do remember the workshop because I was working at The Voice, which was, still is, no longer is actually, but on Astor Place, which isn't far from St. Mark's. And, you know, I'd walk over for lunch and stop by the bookstore, which is the one thing that I wish the workshop still had, the bookstore, because as somebody mentioned earlier, you could actually see books by different Asian American authors, and it was also a great space. It was beneath street level, and above was the Gap. So if there were readings, you could hear people walking up and down, and if you were a good reader, you'd kind of time the steps with what you were reading, and it works well with poems, not necessarily with prose. So I'm going to read from my latest poetry book, Thorngrass. Bit of promotion here. I brought a few copies. And this is, you know, as writers, we have had our share of rejections, and some editors do it well, and some don't. And this is called Ode to Odious Editors. You rat-bite, foul buttock, chicken wing, butt, bat gizzard, snail puke, platypus's bronchial wart. You artificial additive, non-biodegradable, undigestible, comestible. You non-growth hormone, stale syllable, radioactive pus. You mournful monolinguist, one-note burp, mewling, wearying pedestrian scribbler. You are a song no one wants to sing. You are a secret no one wants to know. Take that. And this being Saturday, I thought I might as well read this Saturday night at the Wardello. Verbs stomp in loud and rough in their boots, lusting after nouns. Adverbs long for adjectives, aggressive in the parlors, and in corners sit the wallflowers, preposition, to whom no one proposes. How different for the easy-going conjunctions. They pair easily, unlike prefixes and their cousins, the suffixes, picky as to whom to attach themselves. Wild, wild Saturday night, as metaphors brazenly mix, modifiers dangle from the eaves, and gerunds are fabulously by. And if you're a favored customer, erudite in your grammar, sans taint of ain't, Madame's split infinitive may invite you to a private salon where she orders her syntax to doff her gloves and her gown, slowly, elegantly, to reveal in all their glory the parts of her speech. It's Saturday night. Let's all go down to the Wardello. Part of the book, the last part of the book, is a series of poems dealing with the terrible drug war in the Philippines under the current brutal President Rodrigo Duterte. So I was there in 2017 teaching at the Ateneo, and this was when the newspapers were full of photographs of dead bodies, mostly poor people, and most of them were young men. And one of the victims was a man by the name of Leon. And so I wrote this poem in his honor. Leon, lean in the lane. Leon, lean in the lane with the land. He runs as fast as he can. He owns the now for now. Through rain and sun, he will have his run. He is of his time, down with the beat and the rhyme, his heart and life in sync. No need to think, he will swim and never sink. Leon, lean in the lane with the land. He runs as fast as he can. He owns the now for now. Through rain and sun, he will have his run. But the dogs with guns run as fast, and even when Leon doesn't stop, he will suffer. He will suffer on these streets that are his track and where he leaves his mark. He wishes the world to see a young buck growing up, but the dogs with guns run faster. Leon through the alleys narrow, more a gazelle than a lion, leaps in pursuit of a glorious tomorrow. But the dogs are hunting, the dogs run faster, at his heels they bay. Leon in a corner, they bark, Leon, here is a gun, take it and run. Young Leon hears the thunder of the sky, saying, do not pick it up, buddy. Hears the Sari Sari Store's whisper, we are sorry, we are sorry. Into his hands the dogs thrust a gun. Pale Leon wonders, why, what have I done? The dogs bark, and so do their guns. They all but lave themselves in his blood, the blood of the sacrificial lamb, the bloom and beauty of one never to be a man. Leon, lean in the lane with the land. Leon ran as fast as he could, bright philosopher of the streets. Leon, loved by all, was given a gun, and now he is gone. Thank you.
One more time for Luis. Outro. Am working on rereading my play to be staged in August by the Atlantic Pacific Theater Group at the Ohio Theater in the Village. Okay, well that is the end of our reading portion, and we are now going to transition into the Q&A discussion. All right, so we're gonna move some chairs on stage here.
Thank you so much. This has been a wonderful event. And yes, we do have a few minutes for Q&A. So the readers who read today, if you can come to the stage so we can all be together. And then audience members, if you have some questions that you'd like to prepare, one of us will grab a mic and then distribute it amongst ourselves so that you can ask the questions. Yes, please don't be shy, readers. Yes. Yes, yes, yes. Take a seat. That's right. Okay. All right. Good stuff. All right. Wonderful. So we're all set, right? You have your mics. You have to turn them on to respond to a question. And then Mac is going to go amongst the audience members to see if anyone has a question. And then the person can pose the question. So, do folks in the audience have a question for any of us, but especially the readers? Yes, Mac.
How do you think Asian American literature has changed since back then and now?
Well, I think everyone's familiar with Amy Tan, right? Well, so my first book came out 20 years ago, and it got compared to Amy Tan's work, and it couldn't be more different. So I think that that kind of shows how much our literature has changed, and the expectations too. I think diversity was not something that mainstream culture was actually thinking of or aware of, and I think the workshop really opened that door. So that's just my answer.
Anyone else?
I think I might add that, and it's maybe building off the Amy Tan thing, I think that now there isn't a feeling like you have to write that same story, that generational story or that immigration story. Like, I think that it's widened, and we've widened, as well. So and the workshop has, when I think about what the Margins is publishing and who they program, they're really porous in their definition in a good way, right? Not in an undefined way. So to me, I think that after those initial works, there's a greater sense that there really isn't that one narrative that everybody has to, that generational narrative, or that assimilation narrative, or whatever, that everybody has to tell. That there's greater diversity.
Yeah, I was reminded of the fact that I think in 1974, a group of West Coast poets published Ai, which I'm sure most of you know of, and they deliberately, from my point of view, excluded a really well-known Filipino-American poet, Jose Garcia Villa, because he was not writing as a Filipino in the United States. He was a very abstract poet. And they came out with a subsequent edition, the Big Ai, and he still was not there. And to my mind, one difference between then and now is that, the feeling is, why do we need to be limited in the way that we write, the choices that we make? And Villa, of course, he had problems being a Filipino here. He had problems being a Filipino in the Philippines. So he wanted just to focus on being a poet, writing abstractly. But the thing was, there were a number of well-known authors then acting as the gatekeepers of what would be acceptable as Asian American lit. And to me, that's a boundary that, should only be honored in the way that you explain your background, but it doesn't have to be front and center in the sense that Marina was talking about. The narratives don't have to be that. we can be as free as anyone. And I think the burst of creativity since the 80s, particularly with Maxine Hong Kingston, whom I regard as a wonderful writer, has shown that we're capable as any other group of writers to explore the farthest reaches wherever our imagination takes us.
The mic. The mic. I think Bino missed it, right?
I think what's happening now is that identity is really hot stuff. And we might have something to do with it. That we actually created this spice that after 20 years that everybody's consuming. And because we're all still writing and we're all still publishing, I think what's happening, at least personally for me, now that I've made a decision for my second poetry collection to remove identity from it and to write in general terms, that it became really challenging to publish. And I always wonder, and I would watch it very, very carefully, like when I join poetry competitions and see who's winning and who's not winning the competitions. And almost certainly when people of color win it seems like they're being viewed, they're being judged from a ethnic formulaic perspective. Meaning, if I decide to one day, and I say this as a joke, but I think it might be true, that if I put lumpia in every poem that I write, that I might actually get published more. And then, and I don't know if that's a backlash or the editors in their effort to be PC, is that the right word now? I don't know. In their effort not to be canceled, are actually limiting themselves in their perspectives as well. And I still have that struggle as a Filipino-American writer, that editors still don't understand that for us Filipino-Americans, Asian America is not necessarily based in the United States. When I wrote my first novel, I said, I'm gonna write a novel, and I wrote this and finished this at the workshop that is not intentionally based in the United States, but it's a Filipino-American novel. In 1999, no one understood it. And they still don't understand it. I do, oh my God. Take a picture.
Meg, do we still have time? I think we've come to the end, right? Oh, 3:26. Okay, we have 4 minutes. I think there was a question in that row, or no?
My question was sort of similar to this. I was just wondering when you started out. First of all, thank you so much for all the readings and for creating this space. I think for writers like me who moved to the U.S. a bit later than seems like it started, I wish I had found this space earlier, but I'm here now. So I'm just wondering, when you started out, did you have any explicit sort of mission to promote or sort of be like, we're carving out space? Or is it something that as it grew and you kind of saw how the culture around you was reacting and responding, that you had a better, clearer idea of what you could do or what the possibilities were?
Talk about the yeses. Oh, yeah, as I said earlier, it was all about the yeses. Keep in mind that when the organization was founded, it was like the early 90s. It was a very difficult time to be an artist. Not only did you have AIDS wiping out like so many artists, but there was a backlash in government funding. There was just no support for artists. But yet, but for some reason, we thought that this might actually work, And what I mean by the yeses is that we were like, oh, well, we should start a workshop, right, with other fellow writers. And we just said, let's do it. And we started advertising in places and literally going to readings and passing out flyers saying, hey, do you want to join us? And so many people said yes, and they came. And then within like 3 months, we were running like 3 different workshops, right? And then when we were having so much fun doing that, we said, hey, let's do a reading together, and we said yes to that. And our first reading was actually a Vincent Chin reading, an 10th anniversary of his murder. And then from that, we said, well, why don't we publish books? And within the first year, we started publishing books, right? And then we started offering fellowships, those Van Leer fellowships, $7,000 plus, the support of a mentorship team of an editor, agent, publisher, and a writer. Exactly, and winning, and that was all within like the first 3 or 4 years of the group. And then we opened the bookstore. We started publishing books. So many yeses. Do you know what I mean? So many. We really didn't think of a big plan. I think the one thing just sort of related to what Ed was saying, where he read in his bio, was that I think for a lot of us, we decided that we weren't going to do the MFA thing. We didn't want to go through that mainstream stuff, and we wanted to be in a separate space and to be working with other people of color and Asian American writers. And I think that was the one thing that we were thinking about, right, Ed?
Yes.
Okay.
I think I would just add too that, oftentimes we think that art is like you're just doing it alone. And I feel like, especially with writing, people can think that. But I feel like from my experience, writing is about community. And especially as a poet, I don't think it would be possible to be a poet in this way without having community. And I just think about like the workshop Under the Gap, and like the South Asian Women's Creative Collective would often have events there. It was like a community space for other organizations. And I used to be the leader at Seki for South Asian Women, and we often had events in collaboration with Saucy and the workshop. And so there was this real sense of community. And now today there's like Kundiman and all these other organizations as well. And I think just for me, like the kernel of that is that we are connected beyond the page to like lived experience, to also work towards justice. And when I think about also our literature today, it's also still a mode of activism. And I think the social context remains relevant in terms of hate violence, but also things have also transformed in terms of thinking about our connection to Black Lives Matter and to other communities of color, and what does that look like and how does that show up not only in our language, but in our lived practice.
I think also we should mention that we started as a group of people who were workshopping our work. And it was the first time that we actually were in an environment where we were workshopping with people who actually understood what we were doing, and we didn't have to constantly explain or, put in all the explanations and the definitions and everything so people would understand. So it was the first time that we actually got it. And it was really this group of people that just kept growing and growing and growing and growing. And we just collected people everywhere we went. And it was just so beautiful.
Well, I think that's just a really powerful way to end today's wonderful set of readings in honor of the 30th anniversary of the Asian American Writers Workshop. Before we close, I want to ask the readers to stay on the stage. And then everyone in the audience, please join us upstairs for a reception. We will join you there shortly. And for any of you who had questions you could not pose as a group, please feel free to pose them to the wonderful readers during the reception. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you.